What's your top advice for someone starting in user experience today?
My top advice that, build your relationships before you need them.
From a leadership perspective, how do you ensure accessibility requirements are clearly documented for developers?
From a leadership role, it's fostering that culture of collaboration.
From a hiring manager's perspective, Chantal, what do you look for in a portfolio?
Sought after best designers don't necessarily have a super robust.
How do you foster a culture where accessibility is baked into every project? You know those people you meet in your career who just leave a mark? The kind of person whose way of working, curiosity, and passion you can't help but admire. For me, that person is Chantel Butler, a senior user experience design lead working at one of the largest health exchanges in the US. I have known Chantel for over 7 years now. We have built responsive, inclusive designs together, had amazing jam sessions where ideas bounced like crazy, and somewhere along the way, we became good friends. What I love most about her is how she thinks about design. Not just how it looks, but how it feels for every single user. She has this gift for bringing the teams together, pushing for inclusivity, and still keeping things practical and executable. And today, she's sharing her journey. So, if you are curious about inclusive designs, user experience leadership, and actionable tips that you can use in your career, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment with one question you would ask Chantel if you had the chance. We would love to hear from you because it really helps more designers and user experience aspirants discover this video. Enjoy the conversation. Hey Chantal, welcome. So glad to finally have you here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Param. It's so exciting to be here. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. That's awesome, Chantal. You know, when I was preparing for this podcast, I stumbled upon one of our photographs from 2019. If you recall the one that we took after our lunch, and it brought back so many happy memories, Chantal.
Oh, I still remember that one. That's fantastic.
Absolutely. And you know, it was pure magic working with you, Sam, Melissa, John. In fact, the entire team that we had, I believe, was a dream team.
Yeah.
And I really miss those days.
Yeah. You took the words right out of my mouth. It's how I remember it as well. And I actually have to be a little bit careful when I talk today with folks that, it used to be a peace king. That's great, G. And anyway, but so yes, it's fantastic. It was a fantastic time.
Right, right. And you know what, Chantal? Over the years, I have learned so much from your design approach. And I still use the lesson that I learned from you while reviewing designs for accessibility. I do miss the jam sessions that we had, our daily check ins, and always working with you always felt like working with a friend, not just work. So I'm really excited for this podcast today. Let's unpack everything and help our viewers who are learning to get into user experience and see how they can find their career in this path.
Awesome. Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So let's start from the beginning, Chantal. What first sparked your interest in design and how that passion has shaped your approach as a user experience leader?
Yeah. You're taking me back, way back. Um, my journey in US actually started in the more physical sense of design. I had a big focus in wayfinding and signage. My first kind of jobs were, designing signage for hospitals and shopping centers and schools and things like that. Um, and that foundation in physical experiences taught me the importance of, intuitive navigation and accessibility for a lot of these facilities offered essential services that needed to access. And so that was just such an important part. Um, and as technology evolved, I tend to just transition those principles into the more digital realm, um, essentially applying the same user-centered approach to digital interfaces. Um, and I really believe where you can grow from design within the physical sense and as well crossing that over in the digital kind of world, you tend to get that more holistic kind of concept around design. And that's what really helped to shape where I, evolved into leadership within the UX world, aiming for the, seamless, intuitive, accessible user journey, where you can really meet folks where they're at, no matter if they're, that touch point is with your website or before they even get to the website.
Mm.
And yeah, the holistic experience is just so important, and it really helped to have that physical design world as my start before I jumped into the digital world. I'm tongue twisting.
That's interesting you mentioned. I know another user experience manager who started as a print designer. And as the time evolved, as you mentioned, right, digital revolution, and they transitioned into the digital experience side of things.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I believe that's how the evolution works in technology as well, like how you change your stuff. And with AI around the corner, you never know what the future unfolds for all of us.
Yeah. I mean, it's an exciting time and to be evolving in that world and how we can really utilize it for the benefit of our customers, our users, the folks that we're trying to improve the lives of. How can we use it in a way that brings um that personalization and that ability to kind of meet folks wherever. So yeah, it's exciting.
Absolutely. So, someone who is just getting started or who is just was stumbling upon this video for user experience designers, where did you go to school and how did your education influence how you think about design leadership today?
Yeah. So I went to Oregon State University. And actually at the time, I was able to kind of combine both design and the natural world and sciences. At that time, you could actually get a Bachelor of Science in design, which I don't think exists as much anymore. Traditionally, it tends to lean towards, either kind of going the programming route or like the fine art route. And so um, it was exciting for me because it really just nurtured my curiosity of, loving the outdoors, loving natural sciences and design as well, and how I could kind of utilize that to create better experiences for folks. So, but it's funny, I was thinking about that and how my leadership skills um, really were honed through more real world collaboration and kind of evolving this very broad understanding into kind of the need and the desire to understand from a business perspective. And I started to really kind of understand how vital and crucial it is to understand the business side of the world. That's where kind of my leadership skills really started to uh, evolve, and it's kind of what I look towards today. Um,
Right.
it's just that curiosity to understand a lot more than just perhaps the aspect of which you're working on or the project you're working on. So,
Yeah, yeah. You spoke about the word leadership, right? Now,
mhm.
starting as a user experience designer and transitioning into the leadership role, how has your perspective broadened as you moved into the leadership?
um, I think, when I think about the kind of the evolution of leadership and kind of where I started and where I am today, is really broadening, like I said, that understanding of the business experience. It's also kind of it's understanding there's that mindset shift of you being someone who's your main task is really to contribute to your skill to a particular project. But when you kind of evolve into that leadership kind of world, you have to look at it from a totally kind of shifted perspective of understanding more that holistic picture, um, really being able to create and explore and maintain a vision, so that you can help kind of bring folks along within that journey and understand the importance behind that. And one of those skill sets that I contribute to, not only understanding that holistic picture, but is that art of storytelling, that ability to influence and help folks kind of understand that along the way, understand what your vision is and how you ultimately really want to get there and how folks can contribute to that, is just so key. And but it takes time and it's a skill to kind of
Hmm.
build those up and understand how important it is. We always talk about how often folks think like leadership is the title or things like that, but when anyone can be a leader, and ultimately, if you have folks that are really behind your vision and they really understand it and they want to get behind it, I mean that's a leader in itself, which is it's exciting. So, so
Absolutely. I love that storytelling, right? I believe that's one of the critical skill set that everyone must possess. Be it as a designer, developer, tester, anyone. As long as you have the right vision and the right way to communicate your perspective is, I believe, in this AI age is the most critical skill to have.
oh, it's just I can't agree more. I mean, it's just so key, and that
Yeah.
it also leads to just, much better collaboration and that alignment so that you can ultimately create those better experiences for your users. So,
Absolutely. I know we jumped into the leadership role quite early, but how did you land up in your first role in user experience?
how did I land it? Oh man, persistence. I don't know, curiosity to learn. I don't. You come out of school with just come to continue to learn, and that persistence as well is if you don't land your first gig, just keep trying because eventually the right position will come along. um but my first gig, I do attribute a lot of my skills from my background in signage and wayfinding, and I was such a awesome, like, fun job to start in. But as I think about more of my, like, kind of digital m- part of my career, my first job was back in when touch panels were a very early technology, and I worked for a government contractor that was really trying to evolve uh, technology that you could utilize to control very complex systems. So I would work on the interfaces for these very old school touch panel systems that control like very complicated teleconferencing systems, and also kind of in the field deployed systems that the government would utilize. I worked on some secret booking mission that I can't even really talk about, but all I can say is that we were trying to deploy this, it's a very complex system that somebody could just push some buttons on a very old school touch panel and sort of control. And a lot of it with beta type systems. I don't even think that system actually ever was used or deployed, but it was an exciting time to be in because it was new technology. It was all, if you think about ultimately what do you need to do, and that's to create some sort of interface that makes something very complex see. And it's a pretty crazy problem to have to be able to solve.
Right, right. Yeah, that's interesting. So if you look back now, if there was one thing that you wish you knew in your first year of starting as a user experience designer, what would that be?
Um, we've touched on a lot of what I think about, like the first things I wish I knew. Like I wish I knew more about the art of influence. You can have the best design skills and be the ultimate guru in any kind of tool or um you know things like that, but if you can't really convey the why and the reasoning behind your decisions and a clear understanding of the design and the direction, hence storytelling and things like that, mm, it's going to be really hard to get folks kind of on board and wishy backing you in ultimately the design that you're trying to um, put out there in the world. So those things I wish I knew a lot more about, understood just how vital and important that is.
Yep,
And
I completely agree with that, Chantal. Having the clear understanding of the real why is actually helping build the culture for your organization, right?
mm,
That drives your teams.
yeah, yeah.
So, talking about growth, Chantal, how did your career evolve from hands on design to user experience leadership?
Yeah, I think we touched a little bit on this, but I think, you know, it's it's a bit of a mindset shift. It's instead of being more about your personal achievements and your kind of direct contributions, it's moving into this concept of the growth and impact that your team is having on both the organization and the products and the services that you're building. Uh, and so you really have to kind of move beyond kind of yourself as successful, and it act the team successful, and do they have what they need to be successful? Um, so it's really, it's fostering and nurturing the team in a way that they can be successful and ultimate will be as well, right? So yeah, so it's empowering that growth, and I'm a big proponent for, and I just really support the autonomy of each individual on the team so that they have that ability to grow and kind of find where they can really bring their skills to the table and their strengths. And that's a balance because you have to give up kind of, I don't know if control is that the right, but you have to give that space for people to really produce their best work. And
Right. Yeah, talking about supporting your team, Chantel. So, tools and practices are evolving while we speak. So, how do you support your team with that?
oh, with tools and things like that. Yeah, I'm definitely one of those that over the years has had to use a lot of different tools. And so I try to kind of foster the mindset in my team of more ability around adaptability and flexibility so that no matter how a tool evolves or changes or what new kind of technology comes along, that they more have that kind of mindset of curiosity and want to understand and learn it and figure it out. And so instead of folks getting too caught up in one particular tool or, being frustrated with other tools, you've built in that mindset of being able to work with whatever comes along. Yeah.
Right.
So,
I've first learned about accessibility when I was working with you and Sam because of the requirements to make it fully responsive and accessible.
mhm.
7 years fast forward, accessibility and inclusive designs are such an important topic. How did these become central to your work?
Mm, yeah, I think um it's a interesting evolution, right? Because I think both you and I were kind of in this time where it was we knew that accessibility was so central and needed, but we were still kind of evolving and working within the constraints of what we were working within to figure out how do we do this um in a way that makes the most sense um and is works within the constraints we were working within. And because every project has its constraints, whether people want to admit that or not. But it's all right. But in my own personal journey, I started from kind of this broad sense of, you know, um, that really creating for the broadest and for everyone type thing. But then I really quickly understood that if you're not looking at per se those edge cases or those that are disproportionately impacted, you're going to miss like a huge aspect of what makes truly inclusive and accessible design. So um, that's where you kind of start to evolve and learn that by designing for folks that are impacted in different ways, that you're then able to solve it ultimately for everyone. And it's an evolution, and it takes some time to work within an organization that way, because a lot of times tend to focus on well, let's solve this because it's impacting a lot of people. Well, sure, but the problems that are impacting smaller groups of people can often be much more impactful and more valuable in the long run. So yeah, it's an evolution.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Chantal. It's about increasing the user base that you have. The edge cases that you mentioned is actually increasing the user base. So when you design for people with disabilities, people with no vision or low vision, or people without hands capabilities or dexterity, you're increasing that spectrum. And I believe that's, as you mentioned, it's an evolution. When you first discover or when you first learn about inclusion and digital accessibility, you get started. That's the starting point to understand different personas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know we briefly touched upon how do you foster a culture where accessibility is baked into every project. It starts with understanding why we are doing this. But apart from that, Chantel, what are the other things that you work every day to make sure accessibility is part of your DNA?
Yeah, I mean I think that's a big part of it, right? I think it's ultimately to design the most accessible products, you have to move away from this thought process that it's just a compliance need. Uh, I think some organizations certainly start in, in that realm of you've got to meet a specific compliance a need, but in order to kind of move beyond that, you have to kind of start to grow that within the mindset of the organization. So it's not necessarily, and I talk about this not necessarily in just the context of your digital products, but in everything you do, including within your organization itself. Uh, a lot of users of various products within your organization. And so you kind of have to build it there as well as for your customers. And so when you're starting to grow that within the organizational framework, it then really starts to evolve into your everyday processes and part of the work as opposed to something that you're, you know, checking off a list.
But you're absolutely right there, Chantal. Going beyond compliance is what derives your team and the organization. And I believe empathy is what we need while we are working with people who are actually shaping the digital world, right? And I have always said designers are the true enablers of inclusion. So that's the starting point. And I believe that's where we need to put more focus on.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree. I often find and say that that empathy is a designer superpower.
Yeah.
We have that ability to see kind of beyond ourselves and then the needs of our customers and truly make that impact. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. So if you are a designer watching this video, take notes. Empathy is the superpower of every designer.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for that wisdom, Chantel. So, from a leadership perspective, how do you ensure accessibility requirements are clearly documented for developers?
Yeah, it's I'm fortunate and lucky to have and work with folks that this is their specialty. And this is what they do on a day-to-day basis. From a leadership role, it's, it's fostering that culture of collaboration and that shared responsibility. So it's not necessarily just one person's job or just those specialists I mentioned, but it's everyone's kind of responsibility to ensure that handoff that and that folks have what they need in order to do their job. And it's, ensuring that accessibility is a part of the team's culture and from the start. And, and so that's what I try to do from more of a leadership perspective. Um, and we're also working on a pretty robust design system so that we can build more of that into a system as opposed to relying on more, that tedious work of humans that can make mistakes. Document hand off from one, group to the next. So uh I think that's where really that will help ensure that it's correct and important.
Yeah, you touched upon two very important topics here, Chantel. So I'll go one by one. You spoke about building systems or processes. So, how do you ensure that your team members, maybe members who are already part of the organization or somebody who's joining new, have the right knowledge on what those systems are?
Yeah, I that's a really good question because, onboarding folks into your organization and your systems is so crucial. A really good onboarding kind of process. Also providing that time to onboard so that they have a clear understanding of what systems we're working with, what we're utilizing, and how and the value behind it so they can see the benefit that it offers. Um, and so, you know, at the organization I work with, that's key. And we've evolved that over the years so that folks have what they need to kind of get started and utilize those systems most effectively. So
Right. Yeah, onboarding new members is always challenging with the existing processes, helping them understand what we do and why we do. So that's critical. The second aspect that you touched upon, Chantal, was design systems. Now, because we are part of the industry, we know what design systems are. But for someone who is watching this video and he has no clue about it, if you want to define it, what a design system is.
yeah, it's in the most simplest form, a design system is a source of truth. So it is basically this bread box, if you will, of all kind of information and code um and kind of your style guides and all of the key attributes that make up your product. Um and what's even broader than that, a design system always also builds in all of the processes and the uh, the documentation that's needed so that you can have that very seamless handoff of, of all of those requirements to the developers. Um, and it's fantastic because it can create such consistency. It takes so much off the plates of folks that tedious work so that can really fun, um, the more fun aspect of design and having to repeat those things over and over. But I say all this, but we're still in the works of creating that so that it's really quite flawless and usable by all the involved. And
Right, right. And I believe that's a very good definition. It's a source of truth. So if you're building an application or a suite of applications, that's the best way to have consistent look and feel across different websites that you are building because you have single source of truth.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah. And it's so key and it will save you so much time and instructions. Important aspect.
Right, right. So Chantal, design handoffs for developers is also one of the critical process in the place, right? So when it comes to handoffs, how do you set up a process that keeps accessibility front and center?
Oh, yes. I think, you know, again, we talked a little bit about how key it is to embed it in kind of your workflows or principles into kind of the mindset of the organization. From a leadership role, I feel like that's kind of where I can plug in the best to really ensure that that's a part of our culture. um, in our organization, what's so key about that is that relationship building so that we're really able to collaborate and work across the table to ensure those smooth handoffs and that accessibility is really built into kind of that process. Um, we've also, we work within kind of an agile mindset. And so, in thinking about scrum teams and things like that, ensuring responsibility, whose responsibility, what is that shared responsibility across the team to ensure that that is built into. into the process, into the end product. So yeah, I feel like there's a couple ways of kind of going that, but from my perspective, the foundation is that collaboration and also building it into the mindset of the organization.
Right. Yeah. Responsibility or accountability are also key to the success of inclusive designs, Chantal. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Now let's change our gears. Let's talk about from the portfolio and getting experience standpoint. So from a hiring manager's perspective, Chantal, what do you look for in a portfolio?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. And it's one that, I hired several people through a couple different positions. And the one thing that I keep coming back to is to, and I have to say this, is yes, the portfolio can give you that edge, especially in this super competitive market. Uh, However, I find that some of the most sought after and best designers don't necessarily have a super robust portfolio. And so just, trying to help folks understand that it's not all set on a portfolio per se, to think about, you know, the the getting to know folks through interviews and different activities is really where you start to learn some of those things that I look for, or maybe traditionally folks look for in a portfolio. Um, and those are a lot around kind of how folks, how folks think, how they're how they go through processes and information, how they're kind of, working cross collaboratively to understand both the business need and the technical constraints that they're working under. Um, and you know a lot of and how they're working through trade-offs and various I, I feel like in the field that I work in, that's constantly what you're doing, and is kind of that negotiation of constraints and those business needs, and what are those risks, and think and so those are the things I kind of want to see, whether it's through a portfolio or through kind of conversation and interviews and um, various activities that you can do. I think that's the key in kind of understanding.
Right, right. And I'm sure, Chantal, you might be seeing hundreds of portfolios during your time as a leader, right? Have you seen a portfolio which talks about accessibility focused work in those?
Um, yeah, I mean, you do. I think some folks, you can really tell and the difference between those that mention it as almost like a requirement or a criteria versus those that talk about it where it's kind of built into the mindset of the product. Like, at you can really start to see kind of the difference in how they approach that. And we're really looking for more of the latter, right? We want you that it's built into their mindset, into the work, every portion and every part of the process and things like that. And so that's where you can really gain that insight into how ability work.
Right, right. So if you're building your portfolio, ensure that you're having inclusive design practices because a user experience manager looks for it. Yeah, that's for them to comment on this video, Chantal. Chantal, can you walk us through a typical day as a user experience manager?
Use that game. I always find that's kind of a funny and sort of curious question, because I'm like, is there people that have like, things quickly in order and they have it? Um, but if I were to kind of sum it up, it it's ultimately I spend my days ensuring that I've removes the barriers that any of my team might have. So I spend a lot of my time ensuring that the team has what they need. They know kind of where they're going and kind of the why behind that. So much of what we do, we don't necessarily have a clear idea or understanding behind the why. Like, why this requirement, why design change need, or why, in the sector of which I work, like why this legislature change or why this federal directive, and so much of what I do and working with my fellow colleagues is ensuring that folks have the why behind what they're doing. That ultimately will help them create that better solution, that better end product, that outcome essentially.
Yeah, I bet you are wearing multiple hats as a user experience manager, Shantel. So my next question is tied to it. So how do you balance mentoring, strategy, and advocacy while staying connected with your design practice?
Yeah, I think part of that is really setting, kind of clear boundaries around where you put your attention and time, and balance all of these various efforts. I think that's so key in order to be able to, not strain yourself too much or your team, and be able to focus on what needs to be done. Um, Another huge part of that is prioritizing relationship. It is just a key aspect to ensure you're dividing your time accordingly, and you're also, really actively listening for where can you bring the most value, and all of these areas of which you're balancing and working with and between. Um, and so, I read a book a while ago that once said, never miss a one-on-one. Uh, and and that's a motto that I try to keep, because it's so important to continuously grow in those relationships and ensure that you're balancing everything accordingly.
Mhm.
So
That's a good way to put out or give share your insights, Shantel. I believe having those processes, the right processes in place, also helps you so that you can dedicate your energy and time to the most important task and have your team who has been trained on it take care of other or low priority tasks.
yeah. So you summed it up way better than I
I learned it from you, Chantal.
should.
So, if we have to talk about the biggest challenge as a user experience manager today, what would that be?
Oh man, there are so many challenges because I still feel like user experience it's still gaining ground. Like it's not necessarily something that is per se understood completely or integrated fully into organizations. Um, but I do think one of the biggest challenges is allowing the time and the processes needed to work through a design process. Um, because we're constantly kind of fighting against business needs and those technical constraints and, time frames and things like that, where we tend to skip over parts of our process to accommodate all of the aspects. And, you know, which doesn't necessarily help anyone in the long run, because that's where you start to make mistakes, and or you put out in the world something that the customer didn't really need to begin with. We're kind of skipping those processes that can really get you to the best solution and the best uh, answer to that customer's question. So I feel like it's an ongoing challenge that we
Right.
have to work with them.
For our audience who is new to this user experience world, what is the difference between UI and UX?
Yeah, I think of course UI, which is user interface, is more of the design that you see on your screen. So those are the components and elements that you might interact with. Where to me, user experience or UX is kind of the all encompassing aspect. So it's the elements and components of the user experience, or sorry, user interface, but it's also kind of the entirety of that experience. So how they interact with it, what one component leads to the next, what is that kind of entire workflow. You could also get into the aspects of human behavior and how where somebody is, how they're acting before they get there, and when they leave, as far as like your website per se might go. So to me, user experience is all encompassing. It's kind of the whole kind of picture where UI is almost an element of that experience.
All right, thanks for that, Shenton. Yeah,
No, yeah.
awesome. So, what's your top advice for someone starting in user experience today?
My top advice, meh, I would say to, stay curious. Um, I think we talked a little bit around relationships, is building those relationships. I took this leadership course once that said that, build your relationships before you need them. And I just think it's so key for that collaboration. It's advocating for UX. It's advocating for the importance behind user research and things like that. I mean, all of those aspects and needs are going to happen because you formulated those relationships and you've built, you reached across the table to understand the needs of others and the needs of your customers. So stay curious. Um, the other aspect, and we talked about tools and things like that, but don't chase the perfect tool, or you have to have the right tool in order to do your job. It's more chasing understanding. So,
Mhm.
it's really understanding what is the problem that you're trying to solve for. And that will be so key rather than for, say, the right tool or the perfect design or things
Yeah.
like that. So,
Well, I'm gonna take note of that line that you said, build relationships before you need them. That's a very powerful thing to discuss.
yeah.
Shandel, finally, if you could leave one message for the next generation of user experience designers and future user experience leaders, what would it be?
Oh, I think what I would say is design has the power to change lives. So design with purpose. Remember that design is a public good and not necessarily a product feature. And always focus on the impact and positive change you see in the world. And I have this kind of motto by my desk is really focusing on that positive change, because that's ultimately, you know, a UX dream is that you're making that positive change. So
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Chantel. What really stood out to me, and I hope it resonates with all our viewers, is the way you lead with empathy. Support your team's growth and focus relentlessly on designing for everyone. And that's something that we all must carry forward in our next project. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode, Chantel. And I can't thank you enough for sharing your journey and all the insights today. Thank you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
yeah, thanks for it was a lot of fun. So thank you.
Absolutely.